Hi guys, and welcome to the second episode of the Mental Health and Wellbeing in COVID-19 webinar series that we are bringing to you during this countrywide shutdown. My name is Darren Knightenford. I've got Mark Baker with me here. How you doing, Mark?
Hi everyone. How's it? Great to be here with everyone. It's so great seeing you, Darren.
I see you're going with the shirt collar vibe today. I've gone more casual. We're remote working. What's the vibe here,
I like to get dressed up as if I am at work, so that it at least feels like a normal work day, even though in this shutdown things are very different.
Okay, well, I'm sitting here in my pajamas almost. Not really, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, just wanted to send a quick apology for starting late. We are having, I think, like many people around the country, we're having some issues with internet. We have done everything we can to make sure that the speeds that we have access to, we're bringing it to you as fast as we can. So please just have some grace with us if anything drops. We really are doing everything we can. Anyway, let me just tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. This next episode is called The Psychological Challenges That Lie Ahead. But before we go there, let's do a quick recap about what we covered in Friday's webinar. So
Darren, can I jump in?
Please.
Just one thing to mention is if anyone's internet goes down or if anything happens on this broadcast, there'll obviously be a recorded version in the resources section, either on the Wellbeing in COVID-19.com site or on the Mygrow platform.
Yeah, and the quality of that will be a lot better than this because we are also filming it and we'll recompile that with additional footage. So if it drops and if it's bad, please head over and watch the rerun there. Okay, let's dive into a recap of what we covered on Friday. Friday was the first episode. It was called A Time for Growth, and we had some key concepts. We spoke about the power of human agency, the power of what humans can accomplish in the world. But we said that context can so often be the thing that inhibits that or acts as an obstacle. And we looked at 3 different studies or 3 different aspects of how relational dynamics in a different context can really have an impact on our psyche, on our well-being. We talked about solitary confinement. We talked about the study with refugees and the depression rates if they didn't have the support, cultural and social support. And we talked about the winter over syndrome. If you missed that, please go and watch the rerun of that, get the replay. Really interesting stuff there. Then we talked about how we sometimes cope when the context is difficult. And we had 2 different coping approaches. The one is adaptive and the one is maladaptive. And essentially, adaptive coping mechanisms are ways of dealing with the context and the situation that actually lead to future flourishing, will empower relationships, and will be a place of well-being into the future, even if it might be a little bit more tricky in the moment. Maladaptive coping is when we do what's easy but is actually ultimately destructive. And a key takeaway that we left you with, and we beat this drum quite often in the webinar, was that growth doesn't happen by accident. You have to be intentional. If you want to leverage the human power, you have to actually realize your agency and step forward and take that path that leads to growth instead of the path that leads to not growth. And of course, the key question we asked you was, what kind of human are you going to be in this lockdown? What road are you going to take? Are you going to be just sucking the life out of the world and maybe falling back into old habits? Or are you going to be intentionally leaning forward and investing into this moment, into your family or your housemates or your colleagues remotely via whatever digital means of interacting that you have? Because the challenges are going to come, and the way we respond is everything, really. Now, just a little explanation of 2 different lenses we're going to be having in this webinar. Mark is a psychologist. That's his training. That's the input he's going to be giving. I am a storyteller. I'm a filmmaker. And for me, story is a really important, really powerful lens through which we can understand the human experience. So you can see there, I've got that little man there with his little shield and he's taking some arrows. Story is a really important element of what we're going to be doing here. So let's jump ahead into the next slide, and I'll just explain a little bit. As I said, this episode is called The Psychological Challenges That Lie Ahead. And we're going to be covering these 3 main themes: the power of the mind, how the mind functions, and then how we can change our bias for negativity and actually help to create something positive. I mentioned that story is a very important factor in this webinar. In every good story, there's a hero. Now, a hero has helpers, has mentors, has tools or weapons, because they're going to face challenges. As we're saying in this lockdown, we're going to be facing some challenges. So there are challenges coming, there are obstacles in, sort of a story that might be a giant or an ogre, or, some kind of obstacle that the hero needs to face and overcome. And the time for growth that we're talking about in this season is a time where those obstacles are going to be conquered if you are intentional, if you lean forward and make the most of your human agency and power. And it is in overcoming those obstacles that the growth actually happens. In traditional story, if the hero doesn't change, if the hero doesn't grow, we lose interest, because that's what we want to see. And that's what we want to see for you guys at home in your lockdown as well. Now, what's really interesting, and it's very pertinent for this webinar, so please pay attention to this next point. What's really interesting is so often in stories, the challenge itself actually has the seeds for growth within it. If you're overcoming the giant, so often it is the hero's knowledge of the weaknesses of the giant, or maybe even using the strength of the giant, maybe the giant's arrogance, using that against the giant so that ultimately the hero can overcome. And that's super important for what we're going to be sharing with you today. So bear in mind as we go through these three different themes: the power of the mind, how the mind functions, and how we can change our bias towards negativity. That story is going to be important, and you can actually use that against itself. So, Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Theron. Yeah, just in thinking about how to understand the power of the mind, it's quite important that we bear in mind two very important fields that are linked to the study of the mind. The one is the field of psychology, which is quite an abstract field. Psychologists would, for example, depict the mind as a triangle, the typical iceberg model. We'll have a look at that in a moment. But of course, this is an abstract picture trying to depict a psychological abstraction of what the mind is and how it works. But then also, we need to be drawing from the field of neurology so that we can understand some of the concrete biological aspects that are happening in the human brain that result in the mind. One of the definitions of the mind is it is a result of what the brain is doing. And of course, psychologists and neuroscientists are still trying to understand the mind. That's why we need to really just make sure that in this conversation, we're understanding that to understand the power of the mind, we really need to understand the overlap. That in a sense, understanding the overlap will empower you in the battle for well-being. And so we're going to be spending quite a bit of time in this overlapping space so that we can understand what is this battle that's going on. How does the brain, the physiology, the neuroscience of the brain, and the psychology of the mind, how do those overlap so that we can understand it and, of course, deal with it in a way that's going to be really helpful for us in this time of COVID-19. So what I want to touch on just quickly, Theron, is just the power of the mind in terms of some of the hardware. And if you have a look just at the concept of a neuron, and we'll spend a lot more time on this in the next webinar for those of you that are not too familiar with neuroscience. You'll also get a lot more detail on your Mygrow subscription as you consume that content. But essentially the brain is made up of these little cells called a neuron. They're like little wires that process electrochemical impulses, and there's reported to be 86 billion of these neurons in the average human brain. And I love what Peter van Jaarsveld says in his book around how each one of these neurons can be thought of as functioning like an average laptop computer because of how much data that they process. And if we think of it like that, Theron, it seems that we've got 86 billion laptops between our ears. And to make that just a little bit more down to earth for us, a number of years ago, they did some testing. Computer scientists and neuroscientists came together to try and test what is the processing capacity of the human brain. And they took something called the K computer, which at that stage was the biggest mega computer in the world. And it took 40 minutes for that K computer to process just 1 second of 1% of the kind of data processing that the human brain that the human brain is capable of doing. That was at that stage. I think things have progressed a little bit, but it certainly helps us to see that we have this incredible hardware between our ears. And something that makes that practical for me, Theron, is just the endless memory resources that we seem to have. I mean, I can still remember you and I back in Mr. Toman's maths class, which was 25, 26 years ago, and how much more memory capacity have I had?
I mean, I don't remember much of what he taught us, so I don't know if that's the best example.
It's in there somewhere. So that just gives us a little bit of background to some of the hardware that's there. But if we move on to how the mind functions, I think what's going to be quite important is for us to camp here for a little bit, because this is really going to be the core concept in a number of these webinars that will help each of us to understand some of the psychological dynamics that we're going to be facing in this time of isolation.
Awesome.
Okay, so let me take you through this picture. I mean, this is something that I think many people will be familiar with. You can see, essentially, there's a triangle. This is the typical iceberg model. The top of the triangle is the smaller part of the triangle. When I say the top, I mean above that dotted yellow line, which is the line of essentially conscious awareness. And different psychologists would chop up the mind into different parts, the conscious, pre-conscious, subconscious, unconscious. You may have heard a lot of these different words. I like to just consider it in the way that Peter van Jaarsveld does, which is conscious mind at the top and subconscious mind at the bottom. And what's most important for us there in this conversation is just some of the principles of how the subconscious mind works. And so let's camp here for a little bit, just talking through some of them. One of the first principles of the subconscious mind is that it really struggles to differentiate between right and wrong, true or false, and it seems to take things very literally, almost like a young child. For example, if you say, maths or doing chores is really a pain in the neck, it's quite possible that as you keep framing it like that, your subconscious mind could cause you to have a pain in the neck while you are doing those chores, because it takes things very literally. Another aspect of what it does is it doesn't really process negative messages. This is something that Dr. Peter van Jaarsveld speaks to a lot in his books. Is if you say, for example, to yourself, don't be so negative or don't be depressed, your subconscious mind is actually just going to latch on to that negative and depressed, and it's not going to process the don't. A little bit like, I think you can probably relate to this there, and if you say to any one of your kids, don't go and jump on the trampoline, what are they going to go and do?
They're going to go and jump on the trampoline and fight with each other at the same time.
So when we're at home, when we're with people around us, when we're speaking to ourselves with that internal voice, and we're saying to people, look, don't be anxious during this time. What actually is going to happen is our subconscious minds are going to latch on to anxious, Don't be afraid. Don't worry. Well, that's actually going to cause our subconscious minds to worry. It's much better to say, be joyful, be happy, fight for well-being, which is what we're doing in each of these webinars. So that's just another principle. It takes you literally, and it doesn't process negatives. Then another thing is that it seems to store and organize memories. So it takes the memories from our whole life and it seems to store them into little clusters, almost like the files and folders on a computer would do. And when we interact with the world, it opens up a folder that it feels is most appropriate. So if, for example, there have been times when whoever's listening in there may have been times when you've been, cooped up with your family for extended periods, like over Christmas. And in that time, there's been a huge amount of fighting or conflict. Well, then your subconscious mind is going to start opening up the file of conflict, and that's just going to add to the anxiety. Another example might be people that are on their own. I got married, Theron, as you know, at age 35. So I spent quite a good portion of my life kind of on my own, while other friends were married and having kids. So when I'm cooped up alone on my own, oftentimes that loneliness starts coming back. Now, there's no reason for me to be lonely in this COVID-19 dynamic because there's so much accessibility through online platforms to engage with people. But that loneliness starts being opened up for me again. So that's just another principle.
Well, can I just jump in quick?
Yeah, please, yeah.
I'd love to hear how the subconscious really is wired and biased towards negativity. Like, what is the implication of this in terms of how the subconscious works and processes what's happening for us in our day-to-day? You're talking about being sort of triggered by old memories in this time and old ways of thinking. How does that work? Talk to us about our bias for negativity.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Theron. Essentially, if we just consider again that there's our brains, the neuroscience and the psychology that are overlapping here. Essentially, we sit with two kind of processes if we overly simplify it. The one is positive messages that are being downloaded into our subconscious minds. And unfortunately, you can see on the left-hand side there, that pan, our minds seem to treat positive messages a little bit like Teflon in a non-stick pan. It's a little bit like water off a duck's back. They don't stick. And part of the problem is there's a part of our brains called the amygdala that pays far more attention to the negative messages than to the positive messages. You can see right at the bottom there on the left side, 66% they estimate of the amygdala is busy looking out for what is threatening and what might be a problem for us in the world. So we literally are paying more attention to the negatives than we are to the positives. And so you can see on the right-hand side, yeah.
It's like when someone gives you an insult or something, that'll like play in your mind over and over again. But if someone compliments you, you probably don't even believe it, or you struggle to accept it. It's sort of an example of what you're saying there.
Yeah, thanks so much, Theron. I think what is the easiest way to, summarize this is to say that our minds treat positive and negative messages in slightly different ways. Positive messages seem to slide off of us a little bit. Like it would on Teflon in a non-stick pan, where negative messages in terms of the subconscious mind seem to stick to us a little bit like Velcro. And of course, everybody is busy dealing with this. And so what starts happening is out of the overflow of the subconscious, the mouth speaks, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And, some of the statistics there are pretty tragic. I mean, Dr. Marianne Rosenthal suggests that there's somewhere in the region of 24 negative messages that parents say towards their kids for every one positive that they say. And Dr. Peter van Jaarsveld in some of his research found 18 negatives to one positive for teachers and in terms of what they're saying to learners. And this is the typical thing where a parent will say, hey, don't run around in the house here, you're making it dirty. Negative message. A teacher will say, don't ask stupid questions or stop talking in the back there. Negative message. I mean, Theron, you've got kids. How does this relate to you?
You know why it is? It's so high because we say the same thing 1,000 times. Stop hitting your sister. Stop hitting your sister. Stop. You know what I mean? We repeated it. When I first came across this research, I thought this can't be true. I thought this doesn't make sense. I'm a intentional parent. I'm present. There's no way it's only one positive for every 24 negatives. And I actually did a bit of an audit and realized that is actually, even when you think you're a good parent, that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. So, a couple of other points there, Theron, just worth noticing is that, we seem to take 10 seconds longer to download positive messages neurologically than we do with negative messages. And you'll see on the right-hand side there, the way the amygdala functions is that in the region of 2/3 of it is just looking out for threats in the world around us. And of course, the media is sending us threats all the time. Negative messages, sensational negative is what sells. And the same is happening with COVID-19 at the moment. So at the bottom on the left there, it's the effort. It takes effort for us to get positive wiring to happen in our minds. And of course, that's what we're wanting to do through this whole webinar series and through the subscription on Mygrow.
Let's jump ahead here. What is the recommendation in terms of changing this default? How do we get there? What are we going to do to be able to not have such a high negative to positive ratio?
Yeah, Theron, I think that's great. One of the problems with the field of positive psychology is some people tend to think it's just ignore the negatives or stay away from the negatives. But it actually is about a ratio. Barbara Fredrickson, one of the prominent researchers on happiness and well-being in America, she has found that if we can maintain a ratio of 3 positives to 1 negative, then we are able to achieve a state of well-being. And by the way, some other research on marriages found that if you can maintain a 5 to 1 positive to negative ratio in what you say to each other in a relationship, that will allow you to maintain a sustained, long-term, beneficial marital type relationship. So it really is the ratio that's most important here. Theron?
Okay, so now this pulls me back to our key question of the last episode is what kind of human are you going to be? This takes us to a new question now. What will your positivity ratio be during the lockdown? Are we going to sort of default and slide back into negativity, or are we going to allow ourselves to be positive? Because in this battle, in this story, as we've presented the terms of sort of narrative being part of how we're understanding this, the more negatives we have, the bigger that ogre is going to get, the bigger that obstacle is going to be, the more challenging this season is going to be. But if we can switch that around, if we can improve the number of positives, essentially we're giving ourselves in our minds the best shot, the best chance of really making something and leaning forward into this time. But what does that look like for us, Mark? Let's just discuss some of these positive activities that we can do. One of the things I've already mentioned is I did an audit. I sat down and thought through my day. What is it that I've said to my kids today? And that's what made me realize, whoa, I'm being a lot more negative than positive. Just being aware of that can really be helpful. But there's so many different things that we can do. Do you want to give us some examples of things that we can do to just build the positive in our daily experience?
Yeah, thanks, Theron. I mean, I'll share a couple of ideas here. But just to say that this whole webinar series is going to be full of different techniques that will help people to be able to navigate this time towards well-being. These particular ideas just help to increase the ratio of positives to negatives. So here's something that many people do around the dinner table in the evening, is they do something called a family appreciation circle. And essentially what it is each person gets a turn to share about one other person what they really appreciate about that person. And it can be adapted. It can be adapted to, not necessarily what you appreciate about the person, but what you've appreciated about today. Any good things that have come out of today. And Theron, I mean, we do the appreciation circle at Mygrow quite a bit. Can you maybe just describe how we go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's super awkward. Like some of our team, it's their least enjoyable thing because it's like so awkward. But at the same time, everyone sort of loves it. On people's birthdays, we just tell people, we all sit down around a cake or whatever, and we explain to them what we appreciate about them. And it's actually a very deeply appreciated factor in the way we do things at work. And I think, everyone actually is quite fond of it, even if they joke about it. But the thing is as well, it doesn't have to be awkward. It doesn't have to be, go around the family dinner table and make it super awkward. You can just be intentional about throwing out some really positive things in that context. Maybe you're living with flatmates or housemates and you feel it might be a little bit weird. You could just lean into that and say, we're going to do this. Or you could just try and tone down the weirdness a little bit. Something I did last night when I was saying goodnight to my daughter was, I just was very intentional. She's 3 years old. I was lying in bed with her. I was just very intentional about speaking to her about all the things I love about her, which is it's good for her and it's good for me, I see you've got your 10 positives right now. Talk to us about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, we'll get onto the neurology behind this tomorrow, Theron, but essentially we need to avoid creating neural pathways of negatives. And one way of doing that is as soon as you realize that you are experiencing some kind of negative thought pattern or negative emotion, put your 10 fingers out in front of you. It's something I do quite often. You literally throw your fingers out and you literally count down on your fingers 10 positive things that you can see in your life right now. And they can be very simple, plain things. For example, you mentioned my shirt I was wearing today. Well, thank God that I have clothes to choose from. Half of the world right now struggling with COVID-19 doesn't have that. So 10 positives and you count them down. It links a little bit to what do we take for granted. Oftentimes because people are wired so negatively, just trying to get them to see positive things. The best way of doing it is to get people to look at what they're taking for granted, our eyes. The fact that people can watch and listen to this webinar means that they have eyes to see and ears to hear. What an absolute miracle. There are millions around the world that don't have that. And maybe that links into that last one of three good things.
I'm a little bit conscious of time here, Mark. Can we leave the 3 good things? I just want to encourage everyone to go sign up for the Mygrow 21-day offering that we've made available. You'll become very familiar with 3 good things on that platform. That's there. So let's not chat about that now. Is that fine?
Yeah, great. Great.
I'd love to just jump ahead to what does it look like for you guys to apply these positives where you are. You have to have your own agency, your own responsibility for your own context. Everyone is different. We could sit here and give you a whole bunch of ideas, but you guys are intelligent enough to think this through for yourselves. Everyone's context is different. The responsibility, the onus is on you to really figure out how do we apply this theme of trying to increase positivity. How do we apply it living at home by ourselves? How do we apply it with our children? How do we apply it with our colleagues as we're trying to work remotely when there's internet issues all around the country? You guys are more than intelligent enough. Mark, I think we've lost you. Yes, we've lost Mark.
No.
I'm just going to... Oh, you're still there? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anything you wanted to add there quickly?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think, we can make a worksheet available to everyone in the resources page with these different activities and a description of them so people can just go and work through them on their own at home.
Yeah. I mean, the key take home for me here is that positives are your secret weapon. They really are the tool. They're the magic sword. They're the book of spells. Whatever. If you take the story idea, they're the thing. It's the magic wand. It's what's going to help you through this season, because there are challenges that are coming, psychological realities that are coming, and positivity really is a secret weapon and tool. So that's my key takeaway for you guys. What will your positivity to negativity ratio be? A lot of that is in your power. You have agency, you have the ability to lean forward and be intentional about this time. So that's my encouragement to you. We're pretty much done. I know we're 1 minute over. If you could just give me 1 more minute, we're about to sign off. Those of you who haven't yet gone to mygrow.me to sign up for the 21-day free offering, please head over and do that. As I say, all the resources are going to be available. We showed you this slide last time, showing you that the webinars are one thing and Mygrow and that journey is another thing, and the resources are available there. I just want to show you quickly what that actually looks like. This is the platform. You can see here's a view of my own page. On the left there, you've got that sort of menu bar coming down the side, and right at the bottom there's a little tab that says COVID-19. If you click on that, you will see that all these webinars are being made available again in replay format, and the quality should be a lot better for those if you are struggling. And then as well, you can see the resources that are available there, and you can click through there and have a look at that. That's pretty much it for today. That's all we have to share. Mark, is there anything else you'd like to say in one last comment before we sign off?
Yeah, I think just go and enjoy some of the activities in the worksheet that we'll make available to you. And we're looking forward to hearing just some of the feedback on people implementing this for themselves and with their families.
Yeah, thanks guys. So that's it from us today. Please tune in again tomorrow at 11 a.m. And please share this with your colleagues, share it with friends and family. If you're finding this helpful at all, we would really love to see these numbers grow so that we can make this free offering available to as many people as possible. We're all in different contexts. You may be alone, you may be with others, but we're all in this together. And we have the power to make the most of it. Thanks, guys. We will see you tomorrow.
Cheers.